Is an informal advisory group for the city's integrated pest management program. We've been meeting almost monthly for 20 years. And it's an interdepartmental group featuring IPM coordinators for the big departments and whoever else wants to come. And it's always been a really good opportunity to have conversations and to have some great speakers. Go for it. Got it? Yeah. Cool. So today we actually have a double header, 2 for the price of 1. We have Chris Buck, who was originally scheduled to speak last month, and I apologize again for all of the chaos that prevented us from doing that last month.
I thought we had more chaos when I walked out there.
Well, that's a different convergence of meetings. But for those of you who weren't here, there was a scheduling error, and this whole place was booked, and we couldn't even do our presentation. So thanks to Chris for being so patient with all that, too. But Chris is back to talk about right shade, right place. Chris is with Public Works. And to continue the theme, the Public Works theme, we also have Brian Pease from Public Works after that to give a short talk about a case study he's worked on in replanting some really beautiful medium strips with wildflowers. So it hit the jackpot this year if you haven't seen it yet. So, and then after that we'll have a chance for the usual kind of discussion and problem solving session. I have a few announcements. If I have time, I'll tell you about the International IPM Symposium, which was last month in Baltimore that I went to, and I will turn off my cell phone, as everyone else should do. And we have, this month, we do not have DPR credits because there was a different speaker scheduled for this slot. In association with the pest exclusion group that's meeting here today, we found out at the end of the week last week that they had to cancel due to medical reasons, and it was too late to change the DPR credit. So we do have ISA credits, and if you're Bay Friendly qualified, of course, this works for Bay Friendly. They just ask if you were here when you renew. So they have a pretty low bar on continuing ed. And is that? Okay, beautiful here. So I guess we don't have a changer. I can click it for you if you want to walk around.
I'll do the best I can. I have so many images, I'll drive you crazy.
Okay.
So let me figure this out.
So thank you. This is Chris Buck from Public Works.
Woohoo! Yeah, thank you. So I have so many visuals from last week when we had the scheduling conflict. So there was a moment where we were like, well, should we just go do this out in the field, And I'm not that exciting a speaker. I have 100 images, and I was like, oh gosh, this would be terrible. So I'm glad that we can do this indoors in a controlled environment where I get to show all these images. So I will not bore you. There's not a lot of charts and graphs. We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into Phoenix canariensis, or the Canary Island date palms along the Embarcadero. So we will get into some good technical meat, but I also just have a lot of visuals just to keep it lively and entertaining as much as possible. 10 years ago, I'm a certified arborist and a certified tree worker and a bunch of other things. But 10 years ago, I was looking at the International Society of Arboriculture monthly magazine, and in the back it was like, oh, call for presentations, the international conference. And I had been an inspector with San Francisco Public Works for a year or two, and I thought, no, someone in the Midwest would probably want to hear about urban forestry in San Francisco. And so I pitched them on this idea called the carrot and the stick, and it was about how we do fine property owners for excessively pruning street trees, but how we don't want to do that. Really what we want to do is use the carrot, use education and outreach. But in that presentation, my whole hook was just showing these really cool photos of San Francisco from car chase scenes. And I'm not even a car guy, but there's amazing documentation on San Francisco's urban forest in these old movies, whether it's if you're a Hitchcock person, right? Alfred Hitchcock, Vertigo. So this is you're like, why is the car on the left side of the road, right? we're not in England. Well, this is Bullet. This is a chase scene on this alley on Sumner Street near 8th and Howard. And when I was living there one night, I couldn't fall asleep. I put on the TV, and there was this Clint Eastwood movie called, and I'll move out of the way here and there, but a Clint Eastwood movie, and basically there's like these model cars were really popular in the late 80s, and he was being chased around the city with this mini car filled with explosives, and he's trying to get away from everything. And I literally was like, oh my gosh, this is literally the block I live on right now. And I thought that was pretty fascinating. There's the car, and there's the alley. What I'm showing you is a before photo of the urban forest. This is 1988, probably filmed in 87. There's a big dramatic showdown. And then there's someone controlling that car. And in the distance, on the right, there's a parking lot where my wife and I, it's her Carmageddon. I know I said I'm not a car guy, but we'd park her Carmageddon in the parking lot on the right. And there's a roll-up window, a roll-up door to a warehouse over there. And so there I am with my wife. 10 years later, 1998, I worked for Davey Tree for a year. I was pretty fit 20 years ago, and I still found that it was like really, really, really difficult work. And I think, like IPM is a great, career when you realize like physically, can I do this day in, day out? And you still want to be working outdoors and with trees. So anyway, the big, exciting, dramatic conclusion, take a look at the before photo, no trees. This is what it looks like now. Friends of the Urban Forest has planted a lot of hawthorns, Washington hawthorns. And that dead-end alley to the right has now been redone. And a funny story, when this building was being built on the right and this warehouse was being turned into condos, I just got my first ever tent where it's a dome tent, kind of like the homeless use on sidewalks now. Well, I first got one, and I would go on my roof on Sumner Street and like sleep on a Saturday night on the roof. And one morning I heard someone like yelling over at me, and there was a homeless guy on the top of that building shirtless, and it was like Mad Max, and he was like, whoa, and I just looked at him, and I realized like I had long hair. I was sleeping on the roof, and I just kind of gave him like a fist, and I just quickly went back down, and I didn't camp out there again. I was like, okay, my wife was like, easy there, kiddo. So bringing it back to San Francisco urban forest, the reason why I showed the before photo is that historically, San Francisco has never had, up until very recently, much of a commitment to plant trees across the city. So up until a year and a half ago, this was the universe. San Francisco Public Works planted and maintained 1/3 of the street trees. So any of these highlighted streets are the streets where we planted and maintained street trees. 2/3 of property owners in all the non-highlighted areas, those folks were totally on their own. So Friends of the Urban Forest got started in 1981. By comparison, Tree People, the nonprofit in LA, they started in 74, so they beat us by a few years. But Friends of the Urban Forest started in 1981 as a way to help property owners, help them plant trees. Basically, the community was like, the city's not doing enough. Planting a few trees on some of the main thoroughfares is not enough. And a lot of the thoroughfares were planted because, transportation and tree planting mitigation were seen as a connection there. Now, what that meant is, so in 2000, I started at Friends of the Urban Forest as their education coordinator. So for 5 years, I worked there, and I answered questions from the public about whose tree is it, right? We're confused. And so I did that for 5 years, and then I became an inspector of the city. And we would take, even up until a year and a half ago, we'd take a call, and someone lived on a corner property, and we'd say, okay, the tree on Geary Boulevard is maintained by us, the city. The street around the corner on Baker is maintained by you, the property owner. And they're just kind of like, is there a sign out there? Like, there's no sign out there that says, tree maintained by city. Oh, the bill is being foot by the property owner. And it got really technical. Inside this booklet, we had even maintain trees so they don't have to repair the sidewalk, right? And then we say, oh, that's tree maintained by the city. And they're just like, okay, well, the reason I'm calling is because the sidewalk's really jacked up, the tree needs to be pruned, I love my tree. I don't want to spend $5,000 maintaining it. So, a long story short, one positive thing that happened on November 8th, 2016 was this little doohickey. Proposition E passed by 79% of the voters in San Francisco, which basically said the system's dysfunctional. Really, the city should be maintaining all the street trees. And there was a lot behind the scenes that went on to make that happen. We, of course, as city employees, couldn't advocate for this proposition once it was put on the ballot. But obviously, we were there at the party waiting for the returns to come in. You know, if we want more people to plant street trees in San Francisco, you know, there needs to be more of a commitment that the owner's not going to foot all the bills. So we finally have that. As of July 1st of last year, 2017, the city is now responsible for the maintaining the street trees. And we have an urban forest plan now. We had done a financing study, and we had completed a street tree census, so we now know how many street trees we have. It's 125,000. We thought we had 105,000, so we were just off by 20,000. So with all that said, Prop E passed. We're now in the middle of implementation. And what we're referring to it as is Street Tree SF. So it's sort of the new post Proposition E. We've been referring to Proposition E, but there'll be new propositions with new letters this year. And people will be like, I don't know what Prop E is. So Street Tree SF is basically us implementing Proposition E. And we've got a lot of private contractors that are doing work for the city, both tree work and sidewalk repair. And we're also basically bumping up our staff 50%, and then the other 50% will be through private contracts. So that's a very exciting thing. And I did want to show you this new cross brace, which is, you'll start seeing these here and there. We put these on our trees that were planted on Arbor Day in March. So now it's essentially this partnership with Friends of the Urban Forest, nonprofit, Public Works, and then this is sort of the new deal, Street Tree SF. The marketing people are always get excited about. We need a new marketing tool. So that's what's been going on. I just wanted to give you kind of step back a little bit, like what I've been involved with the city over the last little bit. Now, what's exciting is this whole lack of funding and the 1/3, 2/3 private city maintenance. Everyone was really trying to work on this issue for years, and I've been answering those questions since 2000 about this doesn't seem right. What can I do? And I would say to people on the phone, like, this is going to require a political solution. This is not going to happen with me just saying to my boss, hey, we should change the system. So what's exciting is that there was a lot of work that went into this. And this year, the National Arbor Day Foundation awarded both San Francisco Public Works and Friends of the Urban Forest this amazing award called Champion of Trees Award. And I got to tell you, my usual shtick with the presentation is to let people know how not like, hey, green-centric we feel at Public Works. Like when I see the articles about how green San Francisco is and everyone's patting themselves on the back, it basically induces my gag reflex. I mean, I really like, oh my God, another article about how green we are, and then we have like this really low canopy street tree cover. So I'm always quick to point that out, not in this, like when I'm out of San Francisco, I don't want people to think, here's this San Francisco guy who's going to tell us all how great they are. So that's a little bit background on where we are within the urban forest. I didn't want to just get up and start talking with a little bit of context on street trees, because we'll be talking a lot about street trees. I'm not going to go into a lot on big picture IPM, right? Obviously, there's a lot of knowledge here, and obviously a lot of it is, on some aspects of it, much greater than my own. But there's a lot of information about IPM on the internets. Amazing resources. I just kind of refreshed my mind. A month ago I kind of Googled it, and I clicked images, and there's just so much amazing information about IPM on the internet. And the key thing that I'll be talking about today is really, but again, we will get into a little bit of more technical detail. And I'm a huge fan of plant the tree, and the tree's got to either do well or not do well. I'm not big into kind of babying things. I'm terrible with houseplants. Houseplants, I just feel like they can turn on you really quickly. And then when I first was really getting into trees, and they were like, well, if it's overwater, it's going to yellow, and if it's underwater, it's going to yellow. And I was like, that does not help me. So my brother, who's more of a car guy, is a mechanic. If you went into his house, there's so many indoor houseplants. I'm like, what are you smoking there, bro? You know, and then I'm the hippie, right? And I have one spider plant in the house. So there's amazing, we talk about best management practices, right tree, right place. We'll be talking about that a lot today for sure. A big theme. A key wherever you're working is to understand the microclimates. I was doing a presentation last week for the Western Chapter Annual Conference. And it was like the 5 big challenges in arboriculture. And one of the things I just totally emphasized was the wind. The wind is the predominant issue in San Francisco, greater than anything. There were all these other presentations about, the right soil volume. There's this obsession about you need the right soil volume. And I think that was really being promoted by people who are literally financially invested in silvicells, structural soil 2.0. I have no concern or zero worry about soil volume. I don't care about soil volume. We plant in the worst conditions in an urban environment south of Market with the earthquake and bricks and everything, and I have yet to look at a tree and go, gosh, if the soil volume is just a little bit better, this tree would be... No, if it's not blowing over, we feel pretty good about it. So just a little map on microclimates. So ginkgo, right? We all know female ginkgo bears a fruit. It's brutal. But I figure we just start with this classic issue. I went to the University of Iowa, and on our pentacrest in the campus, we had a female ginkgo. It was before I really discovered trees. But everyone's got a story. There's news about the fruit drop on the female ginkgos, that it just has a kind of a rancid smell. So the challenge is that you don't really discover that you have a female ginkgo, even though the nursery says, we assure you this is a male, it's not going to drop the fruit. Well, they don't reach puberty right away, right? They have to be in the ground for a while, they get up, and then right when you're starting to enjoy them, like the canopy is giving benefits to the immediate environment, all of a sudden you're like, wait, is that fruit that's developing? This is up in North Beach. The ginkgo, the street tree out here on what is Greenwich or something, that one produces fruit. And that owner, I haven't heard from him in several years, which is probably a good thing. But he worked with people in Chinatown to have the fruit harvested. But that's when the tree was a little bit smaller. And as the tree keeps getting bigger and bigger, it gets a little harder and harder to kind of maintain that arrangement. That was amazing. Speaking of right tree, right place, here's this little side street, like a 6-foot sidewalk, and they plant another ginkgo, right up against the building. We're dealing with this stuff all the time. We have a lot of people that want to plant trees in alleys, and we really thread the needle on what our minimum basin size will be on an alley. We won't get into all that, but as I wanted to find the ginkgo, I remember, I'm like, no, it's someone in North Beach, there's a female ginkgo, I know it's there. What's funny about the ginkgos is that even in front of our maintenance yard, so Public Works has a few different offices, but we have a maintenance yard on Cesar Chavez Street. And this little this little ginkgo on the left, just started fruiting, and I couldn't get an image showing the fruit on the sidewalk. But even in front of our own corporation yard, just the last few years, we discovered we've got a female out there. This was a funny little article I found, not that funny to him, but in Brooklyn, he's mad as hell and he's not going to rake it anymore. Bay Ridge resident Richard Mahoney is so angry that the city won't chop down a stinky ginkgo tree that dumps its foul-smelling fruit on the sidewalk. Blah, blah, blah. The tree is a menace, said Mahoney, who's 74. It's about the same age as the arbor that towers over his home. If the city can refuse to remove it, I would have just fled and never looked back. Or there's something about this challenge. And I think that's where I went from education coordinator to urban forester. My job is just largely educational, with each person over the phone on a mano-a-mano phone call to try to save the day, or at least salvage them not running out and chopping their tree down. This is what I've been dealing with, not the Gingko Fruit, but I noticed he also has some sidewalk damage back there, right? So this is kind of what I'm doing, and I see his hands. I'm like, oh, he wants to strangle the civil servant. So these issues are a real problem. We have some people that want to plant fruit trees, and they're complaining all the time, why won't let fruit trees be planted in the public right of way? And then we have other people that are, want to strangle us. Properties change hands. Someone who's really into having a fruit tree in their sidewalk now may not, the new owner may not like that whatsoever. What's funny about us saying, well, we don't allow fruit trees to be planted in the public right of way is, well, technically we do, because we plant strawberry trees in the sidewalk all the time. That's technically a fruit tree. It's not a fruit that we're eating. It is edible. It's not palatable. It's just sort of a bland, mushy texture. But this is an example of one that survived the wind on 18th Ave, so just one block east of 19th Ave. There's Arbutus marina and Arbutus unido. They both produce fruit a lot. This is one by James Lick. We ended up removing a couple of them because the residents across the street were just so upset. And what's interesting is, so just going back to the fruit tree, this Arbutus marina, strawberry tree, this owner wanted to remove the tree, and you can see there's this front yard setback and there's a sidewalk. What's really interesting about the avenues in so many neighborhoods in San Francisco is that the public right-of-way doesn't end where the sidewalk ends. When they developed that community, it costs a lot of money to pour a sidewalk. So, you agree with the city's like, okay, give us a 6 to 7 foot sidewalk, and even though it's still public right of way, it can kind of be like your yard. So what we end up doing a lot is when we have to repair a sidewalk, or someone wants to remove their tree because it's damaging the sidewalk, we'll explain to them, look, technically your property line is not until way farther back, closer to the front of the facade of your building. So I know it sounds controversial, but we're going to need you to give up some of that grass or some of your front yard so we can expand the opening, the size of the tree basin, so we don't have to cut roots unnecessarily. And this owner, we denied the removal application, and they went ahead and they did it. We have to show them a diagram. They're like, what are you talking about? We show them a diagram, a parcel map. This is where your property line is. And it's a little bit hard to see, but they push back by just a couple of feet. We just want, and it's a modest, this is hardly a big basin expansion whatsoever. We will go as big as we can, typically. So they did that. They pushed it back. The fruit drop was never really a discussion. They thought this tree was way overwhelming the site. They thought it was, getting way too close to the roof. And I was like, are you kidding me? We can't have any more room than this. Now I can't say that way. I say it in 5 sentences. And I always think of Pulp Fiction. There's that scene with Samuel L. Jackson, and there's the white guys doing the robbery and stick up in this diner. And I always just say to myself, be cool, Ringo. I'm saying be cool, Ringo to the customers, but I say it depending on who they are and what their background is, I say it in a different way, right? I say it well, Mrs. Smith, there are a lot of benefits to trees, but what I'm saying to myself is, I'm just always repeating, be cool, Ringo. Don't lose your cool now. But we get a call from Friends of the Urban Forest. We see these things. We don't need, we get people from the public that call things in. Topping trees in San Francisco happens a lot. And we are finally, now that we maintain all the street trees, we're going to do more outreach. And it's just so frustrating. It wasn't a fruit drop issue, so that's a little bit unrelated. They couldn't get over the fact that they had a tree. And at last week's conference, I was joking that, I keep asking my supervisor for a title change, and I want to be urban forestry psychiatrist. Because I feel like I know about plants and trees. We need to go deeper. Like the people do not know how to live with trees in their immediate surroundings. It is really a thing, and we're battling it all the time. So one thing that we see with Arbutus marina every now and then are these sort of cankers, just to put it out there. The bark really dries out, and suddenly the trunk is splitting quite a bit. The wood is really hard, but that's just something to bear in mind. We see that happen from time to time. Another trunk issue on a different species that we see a lot is, this is a Chinese elm. I know it's kind of hard to see, but you can see the trunk is pretty messed up with this canker, and it's an anthracnose canker. There's anthracnose that impacts the leaves, but there's also a canker that will girdle the trunk. And what's amazing about Chinese elm, Ulmus parvifolia, it's really hard wood. So sometimes you're thinking, how is this even still standing? You know, we'll have these trees splitting apart, and if it was a different species, we'd run out with the lights flashing. But these trees just really, they can kind of deal with it. What's amazing is that our Chinese elms on Folsom from like 21st heading all the way up to Bernal Hill, none of those have anthracnose canker on their trunks, which is kind of nice. And I don't know what the deal with that is, but it's just something to note. I put some information in here a month ago about Market Street, and I think it was to kind of get some sympathy, you know, as the urban forester. So talking about right tree, right place. You'd think as the urban forester you get like total say, final say over what trees are going to be planted where, and you do obviously have a lot of say, and we try to keep species relatively uniform within a block so that we can visit the tree and prune it on a given pruning cycle versus 15 different species. If we're going to maintain all the street trees, that means we have 15 different growth habits that we're trying to address, and you end up hopscotching across the city. So that was one thing. Like Van Ness, the bus rapid transit project that's out there, it's a great transit project, but I jokingly refer to BRT, bus rapid transit, as big removal of trees, right? Because a lot of it's like, oh, look at that, the preferred alternative is right there in the center of the median, where all the really large trees are located. It took us 1.5 years to get through the permit process to allow the removal of those trees on Van Ness. But the last second, the replacement species, we had, you know, everyone and their brother and sister and mother and grandparents give opinions about what replacement species they'd like to see. And it was good. It was robust with the urban forestry councils involved. And then the last second, the Arts Commission came out of like nowhere, and they didn't change it all. They just had, of the final preferences, they felt strongly about one versus the other. I didn't see that coming. Arts Commission. So anyway, Market Street, I think what I was thinking about is that there's now some of the Platanus are serving as a great host for the swallowtail butterfly. And right when you thought like everyone's ready to like part with a lot of these Platanus or sycamore, we jokingly call them sick-a-lot. You know, it's midsummer and they're not green, right? They look terrible. They've got anthracnose and powdery mildew. Right when you think like there's some kind of consensus, you know, there won't be. Someone comes in the last minute and go, wait a minute, the Platanus are an amazing green corridor for this butterfly. And that's a great point. So now, you know, we'd never do whole-scale removal. It's just going to be like the weakest trees we'd remove, and we'll keep the ones that are healthy. So there's going to be something for everyone. But these are all the different teams that are involved with something like the Better Market Street planning process. There's a lot of other people. I don't see urban forester. I mean, we have public works listed there. But, so this is a little gnarly for the early morning, but it's a little bit hard to see with this lighting. But this is not a crime scene. This is Corymbia ficifolia, what we used to call Eucalyptus ficifolia. So Corymbia ficifolia, just talking about right tree, right place. Some of them get this kino sap, right? So kino is the name of the plant gum produced by various plants and trees, particularly eucalyptus. It can be in a reaction of mechanical damage or attack by incisions, but literally names red gum and bloodwood. It's just an unusual thing. This is right outside of an elementary school in Glen Park, and again, pretty crazy, right? Yeah, exactly. Right around the corner from St. John's School, I think, and that little side street there. So, no one really was complaining about that, but I noticed, and I thought, I could use this in a presentation sometime. The other thing about Corymbia phycifolia is it basically produces marbles. So, this on a steep street, we just have people call us all the time. Hey, I'm going to trip and fall. And we take it seriously, but we're not going to necessarily remove the tree. But that's a real drawback with that species. The other thing too is they get massive, and sometimes they've been planted in a pretty narrow sidewalk, and it's just right tree, right place. We don't plant these in the sidewalk unless it's super wide now. Chris, that's the crimson flowering one, right? It is. Yeah. Most of them are really a deep red. They flower around I finally figured out when they flower. It's like mid-August. It's right around my birthday. I finally remember what time. It seems like they flower a little bit throughout the year, but mid-August is when you'll really see them deep red. But there's also a pale yellow flowering type. So some are different. So I want to do a little case study here. Myoperum. So Myoperum latum. We weren't planting it about 10 years ago. I don't know what it was that we didn't like about it. Because when I look at these photos now, I think it's really awesome. It creates this umbrella canopy, meaning that all the foliage is out on the outer periphery or perimeter of the canopy. And these can be planted way out in the avenues and still do really well, handle the wind just fine. But they just fall out of favor, which felt like, they're not a great tree. Maybe it was sidewalk damage. But in retrospect, the sidewalk damage wasn't that much of a deal breaker. Well, no, that's what I'm working up to. So 10 years ago, exactly. So 10 years ago, we literally had a meeting and we're like, let's get this back on. We were literally walking down the hallway and sat down at our desk to be spread the word. Let's talk to our colleagues at Friends of Urban Forest. There's so few species that do well in the outer avenues, and that was the idea. It was in the outer avenues, gosh, you know what? Look at these trees. This is a great tree. And I literally Murphy's Law. Within a month, there was first there was something that came out that was related to the vineyards, and I forget what the name, oak, apple, something or other.
Brown apple moth.
Maybe it was, but we had a myoperum right behind our trailer at the maintenance yard on Cesar Chavez, and the leaves started getting, so the thrips started spreading. So basically, we were ready to put this tree back on our let's plant more of this, and then the thrips came, and it was really depressing. And this is a depressing series of photos, but I'll duck out of the way. But I showed you the before. This is kind of during. This is kind of how it is now, and that's how it was before. So obviously these were too many, planted too closely together, but when you look at how it used to look, it's pretty depressing. Thrips is a big problem, and what's amazing, of course, we know, is that if it was a cash crop to some degree, there would be all kinds of resources thrown at it, but it's not a cash crop. There's the insect. There's a lot of great information. I don't expect you to read this, but I just wanted to put out there resources like UC Cooperative Extension has really great information about IPM. And so generally in San Francisco, we really try to avoid planting things that are going to require a chemical solution. I think the great thing about the Bay Area is that there's this aversion to using chemicals, and so there's just a lot of things that, again, usually the wind, for me, the wind is a factor, not for me, for everyone. The wind is going to decide what can survive, but we really do avoid, it's just not a good look if the city is going out and needing to use chemicals to get something to survive. So the thrips is an unfortunate situation, and we'll have to monitor that. The thing I want to dive deep. So Phoenix canariensis, Canary Island date palms, we have along the Embarcadero. When that was damaged in the '89 earthquake, it was a chance for that area to be re-envisioned. And I think it's obvious. The palms, you can transplant them as a large size and put them in, and you have this immediate transformation. So it's not too surprising that that's kind of what everyone gravitated towards. So for better or worse, the palms are there. I mean, they're pretty, in many ways, they're really amazing, and I've developed a much better appreciation for palms over the years. So we've lost some palms due to fusarium wilt. And this is in 2014. We had 8 really dead-looking palms out there, and it caught the attention of the news people. And then I don't talk to the media directly. We have a handler. So Rachel Gordon used to write for the Chronicle. Well, she came over to Public Works about 5 years ago. When she came and joined us, I was like, oh my gosh, that is the most amazing thing Public Works has done in a long time. She's great. Obviously working with the media, she understands what the media is trying to do, and she is really good at giving us hey Chris, I'm going to give you clearance, these are the questions they're going to ask. Let me just remind you, avoid these things, avoid these pitfalls. An example is in the Tenderloin a year ago, the Victorian box trees, the Pittosporum undulatum were flowering, and it smelled nice. And I guess there was enough in the Tenderloin where there was online chatter, and it was what's that smell in the Tenderloin? And it was something that smelled nice. So Rachel was it's going to be really easy to come across as being condescending to people in the Tenderloin. It's isn't this cute? So she was don't be tone deaf. Don't get sucked into that. Talk about the species, what it is that makes them smell, all that. But don't make a joke out of it. It's not. So we have things like that. I mean, that's a lighthearted, good story, right? Usually it's more, why is this tree being removed? And it's much more tense. But that's a good example of easy guidance, where if you don't realize it, you think you're talking offline, right? Oh, I'm just going to joke for a minute with that reporter. Some reporters, if you think you're off record, you are not, and that will be their lead, right? Urban forester thinks it's funny that something smells nice in the Tenderloin. So she's amazing, and half the time now when we get calls, she doesn't even need to talk to me or our superintendent. She knows the answers, and she just lays it out for them. I have way too many slides, but I wanted to tell you guys about this report we had done by Henry Thompson. So, we're not palm experts, and I'm going to show you a lot of slides that shows you, oh, that's fusarium. Oh, that's not fusarium. That's something else. So my approach as education coordinator and urban forester has always been, even when I'm trying to identify a tree and I'm not sure about the tree ID, I approach from a very humble place. I know what I don't know, and I know what I know. And I'm not a beat my chest, that's of this species, and I know, and I'm I'm going to wait until I have all the information. It's cool. It could be this, it could be that, but let's double check. So we hired Henry Thompson to essentially scope of work is basically hey, these palms are amazing. They're a huge financial investment by the city, and he has a lot of great information about how amazing palms are. And I won't go through all that because I know I'm going to be running out of time. So we got a report and an assessment on all of our palm trees along the Embarcadero. And again, really talking about how palms are really a grass. And Nikki can't be here, who's our IPM person with Public Works. But I was talking with her yesterday in her office, and she was just saying she would never plant a palm. And she was because palms are a grass, and grass is finicky, and it can turn on you in an instant. And I was telling her about my houseplant phobia. I was I'm totally scared of houseplants. They're just, one day they're cool, and the next day they're not. So we were laughing about that yesterday. But she's been working really hard to keep the palms as healthy culturally as possible. So there's information in our report about pollen being affected by fusarium. It'll exhibit general decline symptoms. if you read through all of this, it talks about a lot of like obvious things, but it starts going into rib and the tissue, the brown tissue, longitudinal, maybe apparent. You can very easily, your eyes will glaze over, and you're kind of like, wait, what was that? You know, what did they say? But this is an example that Henry took of one of our palms, rapid decline from Fusarium in San Francisco on the Embarcadero. A note, one-sided death of canopy. So on the left sort of side is dead there. So, you know, the reason I mention this is you can have, you know, maybe you have a micro or macronutrient deficiency, but you have Joe Blow arborist who comes in and is just telling that homeowner, hey, this $20,000 asset you have, I'm just going to declare it Fusarium, and you better get that thing down because it's going to spread. Meanwhile, it's not really going to spread, and it's not doesn't have Fusarium, and so there goes your $20,000 asset. So it keeps talking about what some of the things could be that are causing a palm to look sick or ill. And it does say clear symptoms of Fusarium wilt can be masked by the occurrence of two different diseases on the same plant, such as pink rot. And so that reminds me back to the like, okay, so I'm not an expert, and there's a lot of unknowns. We need to hire an expert. If we have the media coming on us about the palms, the best thing you can do is hire one of the best specialists in the world, right? Because then follow their advice. That's the other thing. So Henry did a great report for us. So it was really educational. It wasn't just like, here's your problems. It was really to help us. And we're actually going to meet out next week and do another round of walks out there to check in on the palms. Progressive frond death from oldest to newest canopy. One-sided leaflet death on the declining frond. Prominent brown stripe. Starting at the trunk, extending out over a distance towards the frond tip. So he has a lot of really great information. And he also talked about when you're going to replace it, basically do a contract and have a crane come and replace the entire thing all in one grab. Don't use a chainsaw. So there's a lot of really great information on there. And then he also talked about the new palm should be planted at grade. Immediately after planting a root ball, should be drenched with 10 to 15 gallons of subdue max. This should be repeated at 6 weeks. I had very good success, 90% following these recommendations. So in his report, he gave us some recommendations of what to do. We don't have our own tree crew remove the palms that have Fusarium. We have a special contract, so we can basically take everything from the report and say, you're going to remove these exactly as Dr. Henry outlined in the report, because we don't want to spread it. That's the last thing we want to do. Blight is recommended by him. I thought I might end up giving you like our exact formula. I don't quite have that for you. But he has some examples of where it is, and it's a soil drench. Palms don't have a vascular system the way that regular trees do, so it's more of a soil drench there. And this is, so basically we have Nikki, Deshelia Mixon. She's out there. What we do is we water the palms. So people think that palm trees are this drought-resistant plant. Well, some may be, but certainly Phoenix canariensis are not. They're in these oases where there's wells and groundwater that's just sitting there. It's really, I finally saw one for the first time about 6 years ago. 10,000 palms area. It was really neat to see that. Like, it's literally a lagoon. So some of the palms at 6th and 6th Street near Market and Mission, those weren't doing well. And Ken Allen, before he passed away, he said, get water on them. That's what those require. So we have a lot of information on our report. I'm going to move through a few things. One thing that Henry Donflin noticed is that the palms on the left side that have the turf with irrigation this canopy was a lot fuller than the ones over here that were not getting more directly irrigated. And again, just pointing out that actually with irrigation, you can see that again, like I would have to brush up on this to know for sure. And that's basically what we're going to do next week. This one is manganese deficiency, and they're saying it's a little bit flat topped. I don't even almost see what they're talking about, but again, he's emphasizing, like, don't just go out there and run roughshod over these. So here he is talking about harvesting the trees intact, digging out the root ball and craning it out. And so that's what we do. Now Nikki, she can only work out there from 2 to 4 in the morning. So when she's out there watering and putting phosphate on there, it's happening at 2 to 4 in the morning. So she has a different shift because MTA we can't be near the trains. Pruning palm trees, he put this in here. Generally, I always thought it was like 3 and 9, degree. But he's even saying, like, you know what, keep on some of those lower ones, remove dead fronds, but even keep the ones that are drooping down. Pruning equipment and sterilization, he had a really brilliant idea. His was label your saw with that tree. What we do is we buy, I know that we buy brand new handsaw blades, and we use one per tree, and we don't use that again. But I like this idea of using Clorox, cleaning them, but then labeling them, and then we could actually use them a few years later. But we tend to be, I hadn't read that before in a long time, and I'm like, well, if we're buying new ones, it's still worth it when you think about how much can go wrong out there. So anyway, he's basically saying we have good baseline data now. We can kind of build this relationship and work on these. And here's some of the results. So he then went through all of these, and it was like fusarium, yes or no, nutrition, and then other recommendations, which is really helpful. That first page looks pretty good, right? And then things get a little squirrely. So suspicious, yes, rapid decline. Advanced fusarium apply, phosphite. So he really tried to give us a tree by tree recommendation. We ended up removing maybe 7 or so of the palms, and a lot of the others were still like half the canopy still green, and we were like, we're not going to let go of one of these palms unless it's absolutely necessary. And the good news in this research is that the spread, it's not, leaving one that has fusarium isn't this immediate problem where it's spreading. In his report, he went through that in great detail. The other interesting thing about the Palms Lane Barcadero is that technically that is all port property. So Public Works is maintaining the palms for the port. And the director of the port had an office right across from, in the ferry building. And so one of the things that that was happening is she wanted the palm just cut out immediately. And we had some folks at Public Works who were starting to feel like, we cannot wait. This contract is taking way too long. And we're thinking like, you might think you're getting pressure right now, but go cut those down with a chainsaw and have some more of those die, and then you'll see if you should listen to us or not. We held off, we got the contract. Now at the end of the report, Henry Donaldson Monroe, this is really cool, I wanted to include this. Extremely impressed with the knowledge and information that Carla Short shared with me about trees and palms in San Francisco. She's the former urban forester, she's our superintendent. Her city arborist, James Deviney, he was an inspector with me. The two of us were covering the entire city at one point. James Deviney was also well informed and a true palm plant aficionado. I suggest you give him charge of overseeing these palms. He would do a great job. So I really love this, and one of the reasons I love it is because James prepared for this site meeting with Dr. Henry Donaldson like a boot camp. He was like, really getting into palms. He knew Jason Deweese over at Flora Grub Gardens, and he was getting ready for the doctor's visit. He was like, all the plant anatomy, the rachis or rachis, however you pronounce it. He was ready for this meeting, and James Deviney was literally on cloud 9 for the rest of his days with us. He eventually went to go do some farming in Grass Valley. So But he was literally, his feet did not touch the ground for months. He was like, the doctor told me that but meanwhile, he was literally, it was like boot camp. He was like, I think I'm ready. And this is some visuals of what we dealt with. So the director of the port is literally looking out at this every day. And they're like, Public Works, just go out there and cut it down. I know you got the saws. I know you can do it. She didn't say it like that. I'm just saying, she's got people on her saying, why are we coming to this amazing city, and this is what we see. So again, some visuals on what this is going to look like. So yeah, her office is right there. You can see this one and this one not doing well at all.
When was this, Chris?
This is like 2014,
Okay.
so about 2014. And here's a different view. I have some really fun photos here. So we're really done with the charts and graphs. So Phoenix dactylifera is the obvious replacement. It's not known to be impacted by fusarium at all. So to the layperson, okay, we've got replacement palms. I personally feel like they're like a shell of their former selves. They don't get so full, and they don't droop down. The fronds come down, and then they just break at like a 45-degree angle, and they look broken, and then the public calls to say, hey, these fronds are broken and don't look good. But I put in a bunch of visuals because I wanted to play this little game of spot the imposter, right? The dactylifera. So here's just get a little feel for that. And then I had fun with this, but here's another view of the same situation. And then here's the imposters, the Phoenix dactylifera. So, you know what? From a general perspective, that's not bad. Quick side note about the palms on the Embarcadero. During I was like, what was that called again? But the Occupy, Occupy movement. We got one call, the mayor's being pressured. What are you going to do? People are camping out. It's like Woodstock out there. And and I finally got the call. And they were like, the mayor wants us to go down and see if anything bad's happening in Palm. What's going on underneath there, underneath those tarps? What are they doing? We're hearing the feces are near the palm base of the trunk. This is terrible. Our palms are at risk. And they're thinking yeah, that's our angle, right? We're going to clean this thing up if we can say that his palms are being jeopardized. So I still had long hair then, but I had my vest on, my fluorescent vest and my badge and a clipboard, and I just went right in. And it was amazing. I went in by Justin Herman Plaza, and I got into this network, and in the middle of the network, there was a library. It was amazing. There was literally this lending library about the resistance. And it was just really neat to have that opportunity to go in. And I wasn't infiltrating. I was just I'm here to look at the palms. And there were different people that came up to me, and I'm like, okay, this must be their communications person, and he's whisking me off. And I was like, if the palms are cool, and I'm like, stay cool, Ringo, be cool. But I'm like, you may never see me again. And what was amazing is people were sleeping around the bottom of the palms. And there's that phrase that you don't do that where you sleep, right? So my report back to the director and the mayor was great news. The palms really aren't being damaged. Well, what about the strings and the ropes around the trunks? Well, they don't have a vascular cambium. So a little bit of rope action on the palms, as long as it's not gouging it, it's not cutting out the vascular cambium. So, I know I didn't solve anything there, but it was a little victory. One thing, all this focus on the palms of the Embarcadero, and the doctor's out, I was like, oh my gosh, we had palms on Dolores. I was like, oh my gosh. And it was this epiphany. We've lost just one palm on the median, on Dolores. And we've replaced it with the shell of its former self, the dactylifera. But I'm really proud of that. And I think that's because we have a single crew that we use for pruning palms. And it's always him. And so, fingers crossed, we're doing good work out there. Not using chainsaws, using an individual handsaw, and either disinfecting it or literally buying a new one. One other thing, a new book about palms with the Flora Grub Gardens. It's not going to go into IPM, but he's an amazing resource if you ever are like, hey, here's a photo, what is this? Is this a micronutrient, a macro, what am I looking at? We call him all the time. So with that, I should do a little bit of a time check. I have additional info.
We should probably, we need to leave a half hour for Brian.
Sure.
And at least 15 minutes at the end for discussion, so maybe another 10 minutes.
Perfect. Okay, great.
We want to have a chance for people to ask you
questions. Yeah, exactly. So let's do that. So what I want to do is go into a few species, some more species-specific issues that we have in San Francisco. So Calorie Pairs get fire blight. And this is Valencia Gardens, the new Valencia Gardens of 10 years ago on Guerrero. We were still planting Calorie Pair, just kind of hoping for the best. Oh, New Bradford, does New Bradford have more resistance to fire blight? Well, as it turns out, not necessarily. So I have this unfortunate series now of like healthy, happy to slowly gone. So that's what we're about to see here. So we started seeing, fire blight, bacterial disease, it kills sections of the canopy. And if it's just impacting some of it, we'll just prune it out, sterilize your tools, and that's it. But some years it'll be worse than others, and then some years it impacts more critical parts of the canopy. And so I was using Google a month ago to kind of go into the story of that. There they are removed, and now we have ginkgos that are out there starting over. So I feel a little bit like, it was a 10-year setback. These are Calorie Pairs at South Van Ness, and one thing that's interesting is that with the drought, the Calorie Pairs a couple of years ago didn't leaf out almost at all. They leafed out, because some of these photos, this photo was taken in July. So that's July 2015. We'd had a drought that winter before. So a tree that's deciduous doesn't even have leaves in July. Now Jason Dewey is the palm guy. He hates Calorie Pairs. A lot of people really hate Calorie Pairs. And he was like, you got to remove these things. They're just, useless. So September 2014, that was the year before. But we found out this is a flowering cherry. Flowering cherry is because I thought it was a drought. Like, hey, it's the summer and it hasn't even finished leafing out. Again, unscrupulous arborist who's just like not bothering to do the research. Hey, you had some sidewalk repairs somewhat recently. You've got branch tips that haven't leafed out. I think your tree's on the way out. Well, what we found by going to conferences, I was convinced it was a drought, but at a conference, someone who knows a lot more than I do, who's a scientist about this stuff, said, it was that particular year, it was a mild winter. So, I was like, mild winter. Now, the last couple of years, we've had a couple of cold periods where it got pretty cold, and the cherries are doing much better. So it was like, I think the drought played a role, but it was also like this really mild winter. So because this is showing the cherry tree, a year later in the summer, and it's doing great. So that's the cautionary tale. Sometimes things will happen and they're seasonal. It's not necessarily the end of days. This is Edgewood over by Parnassus. There's a lot of purple leaf plum. The Bleriana, X Bleriana, is the one that gets like aphids, and it's just a smaller, stuntier looking tree. So this one is not on our list of recommended species. Bleriana, it's just, you can remember with the X. If it has an X and it's purple leaf plum, it means like don't do it. The one that we plant, we really discourage the planting of the purple leaf plum and the flowering cherry because everybody loves to just plant those. It's a safe little tree. So for years, Friends of Urban Forestry and Public Works, we really try to scale back planting. The purple leaf plum, it goes about 20 years and then it just starts falling apart. So Mayten or Maytenus borea is my wife's favorite tree. It's willow-like. It's not a willow. It's a beautiful looking tree. The issue with Mayten are the roots. They sucker. And we've had stories of someone having a street tree out front and a basement under their house and having these runners pop up in their backyard. We don't plant it anymore, not because of this, but because it causes sidewalk damage, the roots do, but they're not tolerant of root pruning. So you go root prune the tree, repair the sidewalk, and 6 months, a year later, half the tree is done with that. So for us, it's intolerance to root pruning. But we're also aware of the roots that sucker up. Now, my favorite species of tree is it's not a West Coast tree, but it's the tulip tree, Liriodendron tulipifera. So these are planted on University Ave in Berkeley. So when I moved here in '96 from New York City, it was amazing to go to Berkeley and just be like, I can't believe I'm in Berkeley, USA. This is amazing. And then it just got better because my wife was driving and I was like, oh my gosh. And she was like, she thought she almost like went through a red light. And I was like, they're all tulip trees. So pretty cool. But I soon learned that they were much aligned along University Ave because of the aphids and the honeydew drop, and then that attracts black sooty mold. And as you can see in this image, the sidewalk looks pretty slick. So we just planted them on Masonic. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but our landscape architects kind of slipped them in. We'll see how they do. Just a couple of final things. So holly oaks, we plant holly oaks in the Richmond. In the last couple of years, they've been really hammered by oak moth caterpillars. So that's been an issue for us. And then just something separately, more like siren chasing, but ficus trees and blackwood acacia we don't plant anymore as street trees in San Francisco. And for the ficus, it's really the branching. We did not do structural pruning back in the day. We do that now. And so a lot of these trees have codominant stems with included bark. The blue paint tape is going to hold the tree together, or those, or whatever those other strings are. I don't know if they were trying to monitor the crack. I was on my way to work last year over near here, and we had another ficus. It's a stem failure. So codominant stems with included bark. There's basically one stem is growing in width, the next stem is growing in width. They're growing apart from each other. So in high wind, or not even high wind, but under weight, they split apart really easily. This image near Joe DiMaggio Playground in North Beach, we got a report of a tree that had split in half, and you always, it's funny, like, well, did you like walk around the tree? And it's like a joke, right? You're like, what do you mean? Of course I walked around the tree. But I remember being at this intersection, and I didn't notice anything until I got to the back side. And I was like, okay, so half the tree did split off. So that's why we have not been planting ficus. Ficus also do a lot of sidewalk damage. What's amazing though is that we cut roots on ficus really aggressively and rarely if ever see a root failure. So that was like, it was like the pro and the con. Like, the bad news is they damage sidewalk. The good news is we can root prune the tree and still keep it. But because of poor practices by Public Works over many, many decades, we started seeing a lot of these fail. Now what we've done is on Hyde Street in Russian Hill, it's a bad look for the city to have a ficus down across the street and block the cable car line. So the community along Hyde Street really values the ficus trees, and they heavier than we typically would. So we did some judicious heading cuts. We had very specific pruning objectives. You don't want to typically head a tree or top a tree, but if you have a specific objective in mind and you can document that the right way, you can use heading cuts. Now on Lombard Street, as you head up to Coit Tower, those 3 blocks, that community had zero interest in keeping the ficus trees. They had zero acceptance of liability or risk, and they really spoke loudly, and we ended up, it took a few hearings, but we ended up removing a good amount of them, maybe 75% of them, and replaced them with olives. So we don't ever say it's going to be this or nothing. It is always going to be like, let's try to figure out, is there a balance here? And it's never a death sentence for every single ficus. We will still keep them if they have decent branching and we feel like we can continue to manage them. The issue with blackwood acacia, now they're terrible in open space areas, heavily invasive in open space areas, blackwood acacia. They don't tolerate root pruning. So they would damage the sidewalk, would root prune, and then, like the next day, not literally the next day, but they would fall over. So we had a lot of blackwood acacia on Haight and Divisadero. We still have a few, but we do not like to root prune those, and it's not a good look. Hoodline is like, I think they exist just to document tree failures, in San Francisco. They're so fast and good at that, but it's a really bad look. It really, undermines confidence, right, in the urban forest. And to a lot of people here, we probably feel like we can accept a lot of risk, and sometimes there's too much, the sky is falling, but sometimes literally the sky is falling, and that undermines the credibility. So the goal of public works, obviously, is to be safe, clean, and green. We don't want trees to fail. There is no perfect tree. So if anyone of you figure that out, you will be more famous than Steve Jobs, and you'll be wealthier than Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. Because this is an international thing, the search for the perfect tree. This looks like a perfect tree, New Zealand Christmas tree, but it's repeatedly damaged the sidewalk, right? So every tree has a drawback. People hate the flowers. These flowers are these little needles, and they just plaster someone well, if you're fortunate enough to have parking regularly in front of your own home, this is a problem for you. And again, that's where I'm like, stay cool, Ringo, be cool, But I'll just say like, sir, you must live in a neighborhood where you're lucky enough to park under your own tree on a regular basis. And they're just like, they're like, you're not being cool. So Deshelia is our IPM specialist at Public Works. Literally, she couldn't be here. She's had some major meetings to deal with. But I did want to give a shout out to her. She is really helping us make sure that our palms on the Embarcadero, or the port's palms or the public's palms, are well maintained. And then I'm Chris, and I really appreciate the chance to just kind of get out of my cave and talk to people about something that isn't always so negative. Because most people call me every day. It's about what the problem is. No one ever calls to say, "Hey, I just dropped 10K on my tree, and want to let you know I still love my tree." So I love getting out and meeting folks. So thank you.
Any questions?
I'll let you.
Sure.
Just going further back about the palms. So is there a general master plan that the city has that sort of is, that the very first slide you showed me, Doctor, just looked like this puff piece about palms and how great they are, and after the earthquake, so that would be an opportunity to choose a different direction if you wanted to. But
Exactly. Yeah. So the question's kind of like, what's the big vision or plan with palms? So one thing that happens a lot is when we do streetscape projects or capital improvements, we have landscape architects for Public Works that work with the community, and they start floating different species ideas. We're always fighting this battle of like, for Market Street. They're like, well, on Upper Market Street by the Castro, we have the palms. It'd be interesting to kind of like tie them in some way down there. And we're kind of like, okay, stop conversation. We're not tying the palms in down there. We're I want broadleaf. We don't want palms everywhere. So sometimes there's this desire, and it keeps cropping up again and again. Like, oh, we could do palms. And it's like, at Urban Forestry, there's so many amazing values.
Because we're sometimes asked to grant exemptions for fungicide on palms.
Gotcha.
In situations where, sometimes where it's just really obviously in the wrong place.
Yep.
And sometimes not so obvious, and often really expensive trees.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
what I would like to say, because this is the IPM program, is you planted the wrong thing there. We're not going to give you an exemption to spray this every year.
Yep.
Because it's the wrong plant in the right place. And that may work if it's not a $20,000 tree.
Exactly. No, and that's the challenge.
If we had
exactly.
do you think we should have a policy?
Well, I mean, I think the good news is that everyone anyone in, like, we have the Urban Forestry Council, and they represent all the different sort of departments and advocates that have kind of a stake in trees in the city. And, I think the challenge would be there's going to be an obvious pushback on, wait, these are an amazing asset. We put all these resources into putting them out here. But it could be, again, no one's saying we'll get rid of them overnight, but if they're succumbing to fusarium, for one, I mean, what's exciting is, at least, I guess, the point for someone who wants to keep the palms would say, well, we have Phoenix Dactylifera, doesn't require any chemicals. We're just going to make sure they get extra water. And so folks would probably say that. But it's a really good point, and it's one that I'm sure would be robustly debated. But I do like that from a policy perspective, is anytime you can move away from a chemical, I just think that's always a great thing. And again, I'm not an indoor plant person, and so I think it's a really good point, and it's great to know that conversation is being had out there, or at least discussed.
Chris, is that
Yeah.
Max an exemption product?
That's not on our list. So we haven't given any exemptions.
Oh, that was just a recommendation.
Yeah.
It's not a-
Yeah, so Nikki's not here, but at some point we could look at, like, what is everything that we use, because she has to, I know she's got to catalog it, and there's technical things I don't know that she handles, but I know that she's got it cataloged and reporting back in. Yeah, in the back?
I had to plant in a really small space on the procedure. They put a Japanese maple there, right on the ocean.
Sure.
Which I had to replace. And
Yeah.
I was given a recommendation for the dwarf version of the southern magnolia. I forget the...
Yeah, it's probably Little Gem Magnolia.
Yes, that's it.
Little Gem, yeah.
It's done real well, and I see some popping up in, like, the Sea Cliff area. Would you
Yeah.
recommend that as a...
Tree? It is. Little Gem is a nice little street tree. It's kind of like a little boutique street tree. It takes a long time, but eventually it'll be a nice little, like, 15 to 20 feet, solid performer. What's really ironic, but narrow sidewalks with small space, small stature trees at maturity don't do well because they're horizontal. And so it's really tricky, but a lot of narrow sidewalks really require medium to large, like, the vertical trees tend to be a large stature at maturity, like a Brisbane box. So it's one of those things sometimes we have, like, someone do a blue blossom ceanothus like Ray Hartman in a narrow sidewalk, and the canopy is just going to be in your face, right? It's just going to be in your face at all times. So sometimes with the narrow sidewalks, it just, it's maddening. Yeah, in the front.
Question about maintenance and preparing for that and doing major installations. Have you guys worked with Silva cells at all?
Silva cell is installed in some areas. So Mission Bay.
Can you tell us what they're?
Yeah, so Silva cell is a kind of subterranean system of allowing there to be. So years ago there was Cornell structural soil, and the skinny on that was everything went gangbusters at first, but then it ran out of soil volume, even though I was saying soil volume is not an issue. It ran out of soil volume. There was too much gravel, not enough soil. So James Urban really been promoting Silva cells, which is like this little erector set network below ground where you don't have to compact the soil as much. You can backfill with really great soil. So some large scale projects do trigger either a trench of, like, all soil, where they literally put in great soil for the whole block. So on Mission Bay, certain large developments, the planning department triggers that, and they say you have to do a trench install of, you're not compacting the soil as much. So there are a lot of discussions about what's the best way to come up with sidewalk alternatives that will work, and so far there isn't one thing that is clearly, head and tail above the rest. What we typically do is open up the basin size, so we're not repairing that immediate area again. We're not cutting those roots over and over again, and just leave it as a really large basin. And you usually see that more on, like, Dolores Street, where we have a huge opening. But a lot of the sidewalks are too narrow to do too much of that. And a lot of the infrastructure solutions, like rubberized sidewalks and all these other things, there's still drawbacks. There's, like, you got to tie it back into something. you still need some like base to, you know, and then you end up like back where you are. So right now there isn't anything, root guards that you put around the base of a tree, like 16 inches or 2 feet. It doesn't, you know, do anything. So, now we've tried some of these things. We don't want to say never. So we do try things like, you know, different things that are out on the market, with the hope that maybe one of these things will be the magic answer. But there really isn't, you know, just avoiding certain species and certain narrow sidewalks. The thing that really hurts though is I want big trees, you know, and the battle is just finding the right space for them, and trying to be responsible. So maybe just final question probably?
Oh, yeah, last question.
Okay, yeah.
What's your policy for dealing with tree roots growing inside sewer laterals and impacting
Okay,
all
so-
the building systems underground?
Exactly. So that's a great question. So Proposition E, or Street Tree SF, the city is now responsible for planting, maintaining, pruning street trees. We're responsible for repairing the sidewalk that gets damaged by tree roots of a street tree. We no longer, so the questions about roots and sewer lines. Essentially, our take is this. Up until about 10 years ago, for the streets that we maintained, we would reimburse people for their cleanouts if they jet it out or snake it out. We would also reimburse people for the repairs. And then we did this financing study as part of the urban forest planning research, and we realized that we're the only large city that was reimbursing property owners and giving them new sewer laterals. So we don't do that anymore. And the theory behind it is, if you have a hole in your roof, and you put a branch through the roof, you say, look at what this tree just did to my roof. Well, the sewer line typically is old, it's earthen, it's 80 years old, it's terracotta, it's cracked, it's chipped, it's leaking. So typically what we say is, there's something that starts with the sewer first, it leaks, and then the tree roots absolutely do take advantage of that and absolutely destroy it, but it starts with an issue with the sewer line first. Because if the sewer line's intact, it wouldn't be dripping. So our take is, unfortunately, that's still the one thing that is on the property owner, with the idea that it's an issue with the sewer line. And it's hopefully one of those things you only repair certainly once in a lifetime if you're the current owner, but like every 80 years or so. But it's expensive. You know, it's 10 to 15K to redo the front part of that sewer line.
They typically require that when you sell the property to the next homeowner, you have to repair the sewer lateral or have a certification, at least now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not aware of if they have that in San Francisco, but that would be an interesting way. No, yeah, sure.
Okay, well, thank you again.
Thank you.
We're the PUC green infrastructure thing. So that was a very capital improvement, heavily funded, heavily spec sheet this thick. So that ended, or is in hiatus right now. So when that was over about 2 years ago, they just said, you're doing a great job on the Sunset. Just take over the whole thing. You're the lead gardener now. So that's where I've been most of the time for the last 2 years, is just being the lead gardener. Sunset Boulevard, as most of you know where it is and everything, but just to do a little recap, it's 2.3 miles long, runs all the way from Lake Merced to Golden Gate Park, and it has two pretty large landscape parcels on either side of Sunset Boulevard. And we're going to go back in time a little bit. That's the installation starting in 1931. So that's from Kirkland, looking south. But it's hard to tell. But yeah, one thing to remember, we're going to talk a little about native plants. There were no native plants on Sunset Boulevard, right? It was all sand dunes. And it was, as far as I know, somebody can correct me, I'm really an amateur historian, but I heard that it was designed, the landscape installation was designed by John McLaren, who also did Golden Gate Park. And it's basically, that's what it is today. So he designed it as basically kind of a grand boulevard. It's really unique for the city. It's the biggest single landscape feature that Public Works handles, for sure. And it's also definitely the highest profile, I would say, if you added up all the cars that are zooming down it every day. It's a thoroughfare, right-of-way, and most people are seeing it at 30 miles an hour. But, it was designed with this kind of grand Victorian architecture of, the stately trees, big lawns, and then your shrubbery and ornamentals. And from talking to elderly residents that have been there for a long time, they tell me, oh, it was so beautiful in the 50s, and you wouldn't have believed it, so trim. I think they had about 10 full-time gardeners taking care of it back then. By the 90s, by the 80s, 90s, it had gone down to about 5 gardeners. I'd say probably by early 2000, and then when the financial crisis hit, it just was gone. We just became part of emergency maintenance. Arborists go out there when a tree branch falls off one of these old cypress, and we litter pick it, and go pick up the dump. When people go dump a truckload of garbage on there. So it's kind of, I just really fell in love with it, though, the animals and the plants, and the whole sense of this greenway that connects two large green spaces. And the animals are pretty cool. I've seen a blue heron eat a gopher. I'm friends with the red-tailed hawks that follow me around when I'm mowing. So that's the other thing, we mow it, right? So there's no, what used to be lawn is now just an amalgamation of every weed that we have in the city that all grows together, and when the irrigation is working and there isn't a drought, then it's kind of green, and you mow it and it looks kind of like a lawn at 30 miles an hour. So it's challenging. It's a real monster. So I'm the only gardener taking care of it, and I sometimes have a couple PSCs helping out. But so when they gave it to me, they gave me a lot of leeway. Basically, they're like, just take care of it, make it look better, or make it look not getting worse. Yeah. One of the first things I noticed was just how many atrocious features there were. It's hard to capture these things in photographs, but basically almost every block has one. It's a dead tree, completely dead. It's been dead for 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, with ivy growing in it. This is a pile of, there was probably a cypress tree that fell down in a storm. The arborist root ground the stump a little bit, left the pile of mulch. Eventually, ivy and Himalayan blackberry will grow over that pile of mulch. So that's why we have stumps, clumps, and bumps. When you dig this up, you don't know what you're going to find. It could be, a Samsonite suitcase from the 70s or a car battery, whatever. It's just, when we have to go mow, we were driving John Deere 72-inch mowers, it's a treacherous, bumpy ride, and you have to go around all these dead trees and stuff. So right away, as a gardener, again, I have done high-end gardening, so I'm kind of detail-oriented, so they gave me something that I'll never run out of work. I was like, can we just do something about these stumps, bumps, and so my boss was like, yeah, sure, take this machine and do this, So they gave me this little skid loader and a flat rack, and I just started tearing it up. But I did have a little plan in mind, but this is like what I'm doing. It's like just one little 100 square foot area can fill like 2 or 3 flat racks. The spec was that when we finished constructing the rain guards, we hired this contractor to come in and squirt hydro seeding around all to protect the disturbed areas. I was not impressed with the outcome of that hydro seeding for how much we spent on it. It just didn't come up that much. The weeds took it over again. We had the problem with the irrigation not really hitting all the spots. So we got some wildflowers. I do like wildflowers, but I was looking at it as more like, how can I do something that'll make these things, some of these open spaces look a little better? So I got my boss to buy me a 50-pound bag of this mixed seed. So this is on Brotherhood Way, and he just started letting me experiment. So this is last winter. We went out and grubbed it out with a rototiller and just kind of lightly raked it out. And I was experimenting with how much do you have to rake out the clumps of grass and stuff to give the wildflowers a chance, and let's see what happens. So last year this worked out pretty good. That was only a couple days work for me and like a couple people. And this is blooming in April. They were installed in December. So they bloomed pretty much all spring, and there's no irrigation. Okay, the key was we got it in like in December, so that it still got rained on. That was one key point. We're dealing with a lot of areas that don't have any irrigation. But so this is what makes this presentation fun. Is it worked kind of, but I didn't like it all the way, because the next year, the weeds just came back. We have so many weeds here. So if you can go on Brotherhood now, you'll see we still left a little of these patches because there's some in there. But, as a landscape feature, it's just not enough to have it look raggedy for me. It's like I wanted to try and get it, see what we can get, and that it will also reseed itself. That's kind of the beauty of the native wildflowers. Like, you're gonna let them go till they dry, then drop the seeds and come back.
What are the flowers you have?
I'm going to show you a list. I just have a picture of the packing slip, but I've got the list on as part of the thing. It's about 11 different things. There's lupin, poppies, blue buttons. Wow. I'm not going to try and improvise a list. We'll talk about it when I display. Yeah, it looks really cool. But like I said, it just wasn't quite enough for me. So I kept kind of thinking, this is another example. So I had this sack that I just carried around in my truck, and he had me just go out. He's like, there's some weeds coming out of these pots. The pots are kind of a boring display, if you ask me. There's just the flax and the rosemary. So last winter, when I weeded out, 10 minutes. I'm just like, pulling weeds, throw some seed in again. Wintertime. So I come back like 2 months later, it's like, dang, that looks cool. So it does show that the wildflowers can work in these certain ways. They do want to come out, when they get that a little bit of water. Okay, so we're back to where I was grubbing out on Sunset. So that's the same scene as I showed you before where the stump and the clump was. So it's like torn up, right? This is part of the explanation and the justification for the whole wildflower thing my boss has let me spend the time on it, is that we can't just leave this scar. Now that I got the stump and the clump out, you're not going to just leave a big mud pile. It's common sense. So do that with the light machinery, and have a little crew do a little light, more cleaning out and raking it and grading it, and raked it out pretty good. And then we had irrigation on this one. So what's interesting about this site, which is at Wawona, and this is last fall, and it was actually, so it was planting them out of season. Usually you plant wildflowers in the winter, early spring, before the rains. But this was like in Indian summer, September, October, but I knew I had the sprinkler and I couldn't wait to see if they would do anything. So I just went ahead and sowed them, and they popped up. Like, it looked pretty cool for a while. So, I was like, that started getting me pretty excited about there's something here. But again, like right away, the weeds just started coming back, and as soon as, the dock is this tall and the wild oats, it just starts to not look right. And the whole thing is we're trying to eliminate that blighted look, because as soon as it looks like a crazy overgrown area, people start calling, and then other people come and throw a shopping cart in there. So like that was done in the early fall, and now it doesn't look too good right now. It's like the weeds took over, and I had to start kind of mowing it. But I'm trying to let enough of it drop seed, and we'll just throw more seed on it. But so this is the extent of the experiments with just straight up sowing in grubbed out soil. Then we have this is still looking pretty good at slope. I asked the lady in the training, I was like, what about if you tried sheet mulching with the wildflower seeds? So she's like, she had not really thought of it. But she's just like, okay, just do the sheet mulch on top of this grub, the rake soil, but you don't even have to grub it out that bad. That was one thing I liked, is you don't have to try and get every root out. She says, put the cardboard down and put 3 inches of compost on top of that, sow the seed, no mulch. Okay. So I picked my next site, this is at Ocean and Sunset. And I always just like this corner anyway. It's like kind of the entrance to Sunset Boulevard if you're coming from Lake Merced. That's the sloped overpass where our office is. It's kind of like, welcome to Sunset Boulevard. This exact location was a big tree stump. It was a black pine that fell down about 3 years ago. You guys might remember. It was crazy. Big tree fell over. They chopped it off. The stump was there for about 2 more years. Then they finally hauled the stump out. So I graded it out with the skid steer. And then it sat there for another while. But that was when I had my sight on it. And when they told me about the sheet mulching, I'm like, okay, let's do it here. So I picked 2 sites. So it's not just one long continuous thing, it's kind of 2 blobs. It's about 2,500 square feet. And just went to town. I had 2 guys helping me. And again, this comes back to the low cost, It's like, what can we do out there with the low resources we have? It's just 2 PSTs helping me for 2.5 days to get these 2 meadows in. And you go through this real quick. You do it, you wet it down, you do another layer crossway, so it's 2 layers. I like the way the sun shines on the cardboard there. And then you just put the clean compost, very important, not using the site soil because of all the weeds in it. And that's installed, right? So this was in December. And I watered it in when we first put it in. When they were about this tall, I put the rainbird, which I had to run with a hose from a fire hydrant across the street. So I did supplemental water on it, just the planting, and then one other time because it wasn't quite raining yet. After that, it was just nothing but rain to water. That's the list. We can go back to that later if anyone wants to copy it. But it's all, I developed it. It's a custom mix from, it's supposed to be Pacific Coast Seed Company. Got cut off. They are really nice. It costs about $40 a pound, and a pound does 1,000 square feet. And it's, I designed it to kind of have some sequential blooming. The Clarkia hasn't even started blooming yet. The Achillea will come out a little later too, but right now it's all lupin and poppies. But so this is 2 months after sowing. And that's when I knew we were onto something, because it is like, you get in it, it's like you can't find a weed in that. It's just completely solid, and it's doing what, my dream really was, like, can you get this wildflowers that just grow so densely that the weeds can't get started anyway. Nothing came through the cardboard except for like a dock. That's a strong one that can pierce through, but really it's like 100% at that stage, looking amazing, and I didn't even touch it again. Like with the rain we got this year, we kind of had some late rain, which helped, and that's what it's looking like right now. It's even looking better from, that picture was taken 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
And it really, you can see it from the road, like when you're driving by Sunset at 30 miles an hour, it's like, what? So there's more color than has been on Sunset Boulevard for decades, I'm sure. And I haven't really seen any other wildflower patches that look that good. So I think that the sheet mulch really works, and it could work in so many different applications. If I was to try and do a more capital installation, like, classic native plant restoration effort where you're going out on a hill and planting 1 gallon Baccharis or whatever, which is always so hard to make work because of the weeds, I would try and do a planting in this, because what these things are doing is really like holding onto the soil moisture, and it seems like they're just thriving off the mist that we get in the sunset, even when it's not raining. It's just they're not even looking dried out at all. But that would really protect other plantings. The cardboard is cheap. I would say that the materials for this block, which visually it is like a whole block, was probably like $300, and then a couple days of labor. So I'm like, that's pretty cool. Not a capital project; it was just part of maintenance.
Right.
And then, so it's for sale. If you guys want. That's about it.
Questions?
Oh yeah, any questions? Oh yeah, sure.
So it's 3 inches of compost, you said?
Yep. And it's just straight planting. It's not even compost. It's like the classic nursery mix from Linkso.
Are you used to so much park soil?
No, we're a public works. We don't get parks.
Are you in charge of the meeting also in between, or no?
The meeting, I will glad to say that the last conversation I had with my supervisor, who's not even there anymore, was that they were going to get a private contractor to do the weeding on it, because I went out there with my one helper one day, and we were just trying to hula ho it, and it's a nightmare. I don't like the installation at all. The pea gravel is just perfect for propagating weeds.
Yeah.
They didn't put the plants densely enough, and they just want to keep pushing that succulent design that I don't like, and I can't do it. The last time we really got it looking clean was last summer when we had a youth garden, youth summer job program, and so we had like 40 teenagers out there and doing the lane closure. That's the thing is the median work. It's like it takes an hour, plus to set up the lane closure with all the cones to make it safe. It takes an hour at the end of the day. You know, somewhere there's lunch and breaks in there. So it's just a nightmare. So I hate to turn over work to private contractors, but you know, especially because they don't have to like abide by the same safety protocols as we do, like the lane closure. They'll just go out there and weed it. But yeah, we can't afford it. They don't give me enough people to hand weed that thing. Is that what you meant about why does it look
Yeah, I
so
was
crappy?
Wondering if it was gonna go all the way to the park.
It is going to go all the way to the park. They're supposed to be planning more this week, but this is what we talk about in the IPM thing is like a lot of it is just this weeds. You know, this San Francisco. I lived in New York for a while. We don't have this problem because we have these year-round weeds here. I just never noticed there are like all these weeds everywhere, but here it's like weeding all the time.
What's your name again?
Brian Lease, Lease.
Trying to control where you don't rub or take out the weed, and just put the cardboard down on top of the surface. So we tried to see whether that is effective with just weed suppression, rather than having to spend the labor on rubbing everything out before going that.
Well, you know, basically what they say is you just, all you want to do is just kind of break it up a little bit to kind of create some kind of moisture exchange with the soil microbes so that the weeds that are in there will rot faster. You try and snuff them out, but yeah, you can just put mulch on top of the cardboard.
There
And
is weed
suppress
cloth
it.
under that sunset rock.
The weed cloth.
There is weed cloth.
Oh yeah,
under
there is,
that sunset
and that doesn't
rock.
do nothing.
Yeah.
If you ask me, I mean, I don't like the weed
And
cloth.
what happened was there's that porous rock that they put on top. To the left, to the right, all you have is a weed bank or a turf bank with different, some native, unwanted weeds, whatever. All that wind blew right over into that median. The rock holds that seed. It's
And it heats it
above
up.
the
It makes
weed
it's just
cloth
like makes the
surface.
weed seed so happy to
Yeah.
germinate.
The
But
question
when
would
they
be-
use 6 inches of rock, you can pull those weeds really, really nice. They used 2 to 4 inches of rock. So the weeds get past that weed barrier, the weed cloth, establish their roots, so then you try to go and pull it, you're just breaking the factory.
What he was asking though, can you just mow that stuff down as low as you go and then just throw your cardboard right on top? Instead of having to get in there and rototill and rake and grub and all of those other things.
Absolutely.
I think you can.
experimented with
I think you
just-
can. I just haven't tried that yet.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
Just sow the seed right into the compost, or you top dress that at all?
Oh, you just
Yeah.
I'm just like hand sowing it and then going lightly with a rake, then throwing a little more compost on top just to hide it from the birds. It doesn't need to be planted deeply, but I try and basically do a little everything. You know, I'm raking it in, I'm throwing a little more seed, I'm throwing some more compost in, so that hopefully I have seeds like in the matrix. And that's why I don't know if I mentioned, but I do overseed, a little over the recommended. I think, I'm not even out there with a scale. I'm just doing it real like intuitive.
I've never seen images of that nice rolled out cardboard like that.
I'm pretty sure it is. I would get it from Ewing, so it is a product specifically for that. It's corrugated on one side.
Yeah.
But I would hope so. I
Yeah.
mean, why would you make cardboard out of
Right.
fresh
Right.
lumber? I don't know. I think so.
I have a question. Some traditional wisdom has it that wildflowers, native wildflowers, are adapted to pretty poor soil.
Yeah.
And then they might have an advantage with poor soil over the weeds instead of having the really rich compost. So I'm really interested to see how this, like next year.
Yeah. And that's what we are like halfway through now. I'm really curious to see, for one thing, how long it blooms before if I have to go set up the rainbird again, if it starts to, or, and then we're already 6 months after the planting almost. So we're already kind of taking up a pretty good amount of the year, and it looks this good. So, the kind of the key is can we get it to look good for almost a whole year, and then hopefully it'll just drop so many seeds in the same location that it'll come up pretty good next time.
Just a question, is that attracting bumbles?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was that's supposed to be in the whole list of beneficial things. But yeah, I'm seeing so many more bumblebees in general on the boulevard since we started planting. And this is not the only place. There's also one that's done like this at the corner of Kintara. And then there's some other places that, that are just done the other way where it's still real weedy. But the good way is what I'm going to call the good way.
Just a second part of that question, do you know if the seed mix is pre-treated at all? with any sort of fungicide or insecticide?
I don't think so. I just came up with this variety mix, and my supervisor ordered it, but I didn't see anything like that on the packing slip, so I don't think so.
It's not done to wildflower seed, only to turf seed.
The lupin is coated, it's not with any, it's with a scarifying agent so that it'll bloom, or that'll germinate, but other than that, because we do the same thing, we use the Pacific Coast seed, we do the berry wildflower mix, which is a couple extra species, it's like 12, I think, rather than 10.
Mm-hmm.
And we have similar results, but it really does help to, clear the area and then sow the seeds. But it's hard to, June, July, when everything starts drying out, we always get calls like, hey, it looks like crap. All your wildflower seeds are starting to
Just
drown
wait,
out.
they're almost dropping.
Just give us a little more time, let them go to seed, and then we'll come in and weed whack everything down, and then we try to keep weed free, and then let things come back next year. Varying results.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, let's give Brian another round of applause. Can you venture to come back and tell us how it goes?
Oh, sure.
I'd love to, especially since we are working on promoting pollinator-friendly landscapes.
Yeah.
Just imagining Sunset Boulevard.
Yep.
All the way down.
Well, that's the thing, which is, like I said, it was so cheap and fast that it really is doable compared to the old way of like, okay, let's get 10,000 gallons out there and watch them die.
It's almost like you need to get agricultural grade equipment through and just disc, and do it like you would do a cornfield where you would annihilate everything and then seed it and then see what happens. But it's a pretty big task, 2 miles.
Yeah. All right, thanks a lot, everybody.
First of all,
Could I say to do it
Yes.
for 2 minutes, elevator speed?
yes.
Yeah, okay. I taught a class called Weeds of the Urban Landscape for many years at Barrett College, and I turned all my notes and stuff into a book called Weeds of the Urban Landscape. Where they come from, why they're here, and how to live with them. Live with them can include anything from, letting them do whatever they want to, spraying everyone as it comes up to some sort of intermediate,
Eating them?
strategy, which is what I advocate, really all based on knowing the plants, knowing how serious they are, making priority lists, practicing good IPM. Got a chapter in here on IPM. I've also got a chapter called Pesticides 101, which tells how you should do it if you must use your pesticides. Covers 100. Book is available. The thing I advocate is get your local bookstore to order you one. They can be ordered from Penguin Random House, which is the distributor. The publisher is North Atlantic Books. Or, if you must, from Amazon. But the more business you can give your local independent bookstores, the happier they'll be, the happier I'll be.
What's your name again?
My name is Richard Orlando.
And Richard has been part of this group for many, many years.
I'm from Sanford. No, I live in Oakland.
Oh, you live in Oakland. But do you have a section in there for jewelry making with English dates?
That I don't. If you leave all that information, if it ever goes to a second edition, I'll.
You can go do it. Go ahead.
Okay, that's my own.
Thank you, Richard. We should have had the wine and the hors d'oeuvres and so forth. The book.
Oh, yeah, the book.
I'll be doing some reading.
Yeah, drink the coffee. Drink it quick. We have the other group coming in exactly 2 minutes, and we have to kind of make the move fairly soon. But I do want to tell you also, and Luis asked me to remind you of this. There is a bill in the works, AB 2422 by Richard Bloom, who is I think Santa Monica, right? Who's he's put out a lot of good legislation in the past, and he's been a big ally in a lot of issues. This is about restricting rodenticides, and it is it's without getting into the politics of it too much. It's a very well-intentioned effort to put some further restrictions on the second generation rodenticides, which are those are the single feed anticoagulants that are most directly connected to wildlife deaths, and which we banned for most uses way back in 2008 here on city properties. But statewide, it has been restricted to professional use and agricultural use, actually. They're still not seeing, to my understanding, a reduction in wildlife deaths. And so this bill, it was being kind of advertised as being styled after our approach to rodenticides, which is we don't allow it except in sewers, which there's no other choice in sewers, unless there's an imminent public health threat. And we have to have our Department of Public Health sign off on any exemptions for use of these products before we give them an exemption. I think they went a little farther than that, and they started off as a complete ban on anticoagulants, which I don't think is ever going to go anywhere, because there's a huge public health element to rat control and a lack of tools for some situations. The Agricultural Commissioners Organization, CACASA, came out very strongly against it, I think, probably because it was worded as such a broad ban. So I'm just bringing it to your attention because it is something worth watching as it progresses. I'm hoping it will get a little bit more nuanced in the restriction. And, for example, they tried to introduce some wording requiring local public health authorities to give approval for use of these kinds of products, which might work. I don't know. But it is something that affects operations here and all over the state. So it's worth watching, especially since we had a whole campaign on those products 10 years ago. Next month we have Scott Portman from USDA, who's going to talk about biological control of Cape ivy, which is an interesting topic, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of some entomology, which is always the best kind of presentation. Bugs. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you next month.
My whole life and have done a lot of different stuff. I ran a community garden program here in the 90s for Slug, and also lived in New York for a while. That I am rooftop gardening, so